I never expected a laugh to change everything. One playful line from her, my friend's mom, and suddenly, every glance, every touch, felt like a quiet secret waiting to unfold. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and warm coffee, the kind of comforting scent that made a stranger feel at home, even if he wasn't sure how welcome he really was. I had come over with my friend, expecting nothing more than a quick hello before we headed out. But he had disappeared upstairs to grab something, leaving me alone in the company of his mother. She moved around the kitchen with the kind of quiet confidence that only comes from knowing exactly where everything belongs. Her hair was swept loosely over one shoulder, a few strands catching the faint evening light from the window. When she looked up, her eyes had that effortless kind of calm, the kind that makes you straighten your posture without knowing why. "You're not shy, are you?" she said with a small laugh as I made a joke about how immaculate her kitchen was. "Most boys your age just stand there and wait to be spoken to." I smiled, trying to mask the flicker of heat rising to my face. "I guess I'm not most boys," I replied, a touch braver than I felt. That's when she laughed, not the loud kind, but something softer, warmer. It lingered like the last note of a song. "You're bold for a boy." "I like that," she said, her voice playful yet somehow sincere. The words stayed in the air a little too long, hanging between us like steam from the coffee pot. I didn't know whether to laugh it off or take it as a challenge. She turned away, busying herself with a tray of cinnamon rolls, and for a brief moment, the soft brush of her sleeve passed close to my arm. It wasn't a touch, not really, more like a whisper of one, but it sent a strange, warm current through me. I caught myself watching the way she moved, measured, graceful, like every step had purpose. There was nothing overt about her, nothing trying too hard. Yet the room felt fuller because she was in it. By the time my friend came back down, the moment had already folded itself into the ordinary rhythm of the evening. She slid the tray across the counter, offered us both a piece, and said nothing more about it. But I kept hearing her voice, the soft laugh, the unexpected compliment, echoing somewhere at the back of my mind. The house had grown quiet by the time the movie ended. My friend had dozed off somewhere between the second act and the credits, leaving me alone in the dim glow of the living room. The only light came from the TV screen, flickering gently across the walls like a restless heartbeat. She appeared in the doorway with a soft rustle of her sweater, carrying a glass of water. Her steps were light, careful, as if not to wake anyone, yet her presence was the only thing I noticed. "Still awake?" she asked, her voice low, a half-smile playing on her lips. "Yeah," I said, shifting on the couch to make room as she walked closer. "Couldn't really sleep." She settled into the armchair nearby, tucking one leg beneath her, and for a moment, it felt strangely natural, as though this late-night stillness was something we shared, not stumbled into. The faint scent of her perfume drifted across the space between us, something floral, softened by the warmth of the room. We didn't talk much at first. Just small, inconsequential things, the movie, the weather, the way her son always fell asleep early. But in the spaces between words, there was a quiet kind of awareness growing. I found myself noticing details I hadn't before. The way her hair fell over her shoulder when she laughed softly, the way her fingers traced the rim of her glass when she was thinking. At one point, I leaned forward to hand her the remote. Our fingers brushed, just barely, but it was enough to spark a pause. Her skin was warm, soft in a way that felt both surprising and deliberate. She didn't pull back right away. "Thank you," she murmured, her eyes lingering on mine a fraction of a second longer than they needed to. That small, passing moment felt heavier than it should have. Not inappropriate, just significant. Like the first ripple on a still lake before the water really starts to move. Eventually, she stood and wished me good night, her hand briefly resting on the back of the couch as she passed. A gentle touch, not meant to linger, but I felt it, and I remembered it. As the house settled into silence again, I stared at the blank TV screen, aware of a shift I couldn't quite name yet, something quiet, but alive. The morning air was still cool when I stepped out onto the back porch. A faint mist clung to the grass, and somewhere in the distance, a bird called lazily, not quite awake yet, just stretching into the day. I hadn't planned to be up this early, but the quiet had drawn me outside, a mug of coffee warming my hands. She was already there. Sitting on the porch steps with her own cup, shoulders wrapped in a light sweater, hair loosely tied back like she hadn't yet decided whether to greet the world or keep a piece of it to herself. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, her voice soft, carrying just enough to reach me without breaking the calm. I shook my head and smiled. "Guess I'm still adjusting. Or maybe your coffee smells too good to sleep through." That earned a quiet laugh, the kind that didn't fill the air so much as settle into it. I sat down a few steps away, careful not to make it seem like I was intruding. The wood was cool beneath my palms, the steam from my cup curling into the breeze. For a while, we just sipped in silence. Then, as if the moment had been waiting for it, she spoke, not with the usual polite small talk, but something real. "You know," she said, staring out at the garden, "sometimes it feels like the years move faster than I can keep up with. One day the house is full of noise, and the next, it's like it's waiting for something that never comes back." I glanced at her, the way her fingers tightened slightly around the mug, the way her eyes didn't quite meet mine. "That's a lonely thought," I said gently. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that only lifts one corner of the mouth. "It's not loneliness, exactly. Just quiet that used to mean comfort, now it means something else." The breeze caught a few strands of her hair, brushing them across her cheek. Without thinking, she tucked them behind her ear, a simple gesture, but my eyes lingered a heartbeat too long. "Maybe the quiet's waiting to be filled again," I said. She finally looked at me, and there was a softness there, not quite sadness, not quite hope, but something that stayed even after she looked away. The coffee cooled between us, but the conversation lingered, like the beginning of something neither of us had planned to start. The grocery store was hardly a place for anything meaningful. Bright lights, the hum of freezers, the faint echo of distant announcements about sales on oranges. Yet somehow, that's where I found myself, walking a step behind her as she scanned a handwritten list and pushed the cart with an effortless sense of purpose. "This is what your generation calls fun, right?" she teased, glancing back at me over her shoulder. I laughed. "Only if we get the good snacks." She shook her head, smiling to herself, and for a moment, it felt less like an errand and more like a quiet sort of rhythm we'd stumbled into. There was an ease to it, the kind you don't usually find with someone you're supposed to keep at a polite distance. We stopped by the shelves of canned goods, her hand brushing mine as she reached past to grab something. It wasn't deliberate, or maybe it was. The contact was brief, warm, and strangely grounding, like a spark that flickers just enough to remind you it's there. "You're a terrible influence," she said lightly, placing an extra box of cookies in the cart. "Or a great one," I countered, watching the way her lips curved in amusement. As we moved down the aisle, the space between us felt smaller than before. Not just physically, though the narrow rows certainly helped, but in the way our conversation had shifted. The teasing wasn't just playful anymore, it carried an undercurrent, a quiet acknowledgement that neither of us was entirely pretending this was just a simple errand. At the checkout, while the cashier scanned the items, she leaned in slightly to whisper, "You make even errands feel less dull." It was a small sentence, but it carried a weight I couldn't ignore. There was a pause after she said it, a soft, deliberate pause, and when I looked at her, she didn't look away. We carried the bags out to the car in silence, the evening breeze cool against the back of my neck. She unlocked the trunk, placed the groceries inside, and for a second, her hand rested on the edge of the cart beside mine. Just enough for our fingers to feel the nearness again, that quiet, dangerous nearness that lived somewhere between innocent and something more. On the ride home, the radio played low, and neither of us spoke much. But the air felt different now, not heavy, not loud, just aware. Rain had been falling steadily all evening, drumming a soft rhythm against the kitchen window. The house felt unusually still. My friend had gone to bed early, leaving only the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional patter of raindrops to fill the air. She was at the counter, sleeves pushed up as she dried the last of the dishes. I stood nearby, leaning against the doorway, a glass of water in my hand I'd already forgotten to drink. "You're always awake at strange hours," she said, not looking up right away. "Maybe I just like the quiet," I replied. "It feels like the house breathes differently when everyone else is asleep." She glanced at me then, a small, knowing smile tugging at her lips. "I know what you mean. The quiet feels honest, doesn't it?" I nodded, and for a moment neither of us moved. The rain tapped a little harder against the glass, and the kitchen lights cast a warm halo over the countertops, over her hands as she set the towel aside. "I like talking to you," I said quietly, almost surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "It's easy." She paused, not in a startled way, but like someone choosing their next step carefully. "It's been a while since someone said that to me." There was a softness in her expression I hadn't seen before, something unguarded. She leaned a little closer across the counter, resting her fingertips on the cool surface. "It's nice to be seen, you know?" I didn't look away. "I see you." The words felt too simple for what they meant, but they stayed between us like the faint steam on the window. She let out a quiet breath, one she'd been holding without realizing. Her hand shifted, just slightly, and came to rest over mine. Warm, light, but with a stillness that made the gesture feel deliberate. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a line crossed. It was a moment of truth, suspended in the hush of rain and low kitchen light. We didn't move for a few heartbeats. Then she smiled, a soft, almost sad smile, and pulled her hand back, fingers brushing mine as she did. "Thank you," she said, almost a whisper, "for noticing." And just like that, the quiet returned. But now it had a heartbeat. The hallway was hushed, the kind of late-night quiet where every sound feels louder than it should. A single lamp near the stairwell cast a warm, dim glow across the walls. I was heading toward the guest room when I heard her footsteps behind me, soft, unhurried. "You're still awake?" she said, her voice low, almost like a secret shared between the two of us. I turned, smiling faintly. "Guess I'm still wired from the storm. Hard to shut it off, you know?" She nodded, stopping a step or two away. The distance was small, but it felt charged, not in a heavy way, but like the air just before a quiet, steady rainfall. For a moment neither of us spoke. The house felt suspended, like it was holding its breath. Then, with a gentle motion, she reached out and adjusted the collar of my jacket. A small thing, barely a gesture at all, but her fingertips grazed the back of my neck, leaving a warmth that lingered long after they withdrew. "You really are bold," she murmured, almost to herself. I let out a soft laugh. "And you don't seem to mind." That earned the faintest smile, not the playful kind she wore in the kitchen, but something softer, more fragile. She tilted her head slightly, eyes searching mine for something neither of us wanted to name out loud. "I should say good night," she said finally, her voice carrying a thread of hesitation. "You should," I echoed. But neither of us moved. Then, as if the moment made the decision for her, she leaned in, just enough that I felt the warmth of her breath, the subtle trace of her perfume, and the lightest brush of her lips against my cheek. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't hesitant either. Just deliberate. When she pulled back, her hand lingered briefly against my shoulder, her thumb tracing a slow, almost unconscious circle through the fabric. "Sleep well," she whispered. And then she stepped past me, her sweater brushing lightly against my arm as she went. The air where she had stood felt different now, charged, aware, alive. I stayed there in the hallway for a long moment, listening to the soft creak of the stairs as she disappeared into the dark. The house settled again, but I knew the line between us had shifted, not broken, not crossed in any loud way, just quietly, gently moved. Morning light spilled across the living room floor in long, pale stripes, the kind that belong only to early departures. My bag was already by the door, zipped and waiting. The air smelled faintly of brewed coffee, and the last traces of last night's rain still clung to the grass outside. She appeared quietly, a hand curled around her mug, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look both effortlessly composed and still waking up. There was no dramatic pause when our eyes met, just a soft, knowing exchange that carried everything unsaid from the night before. "Heading out already?" she asked, her voice calm, steady. "Yeah," I said, adjusting the strap on my bag. "Didn't want to wake anyone." "You never do," she murmured with a small smile, setting her mug down on the counter. For a moment, she stood there as though deciding something, then stepped closer. The faint rustle of her sweater sleeve brushed against my arm as she reached to straighten the collar of my shirt, the same way she had the night before. "You left an impression," she said, a trace of amusement in her tone, though her eyes carried something deeper. I chuckled softly. "Good or bad?" She tilted her head, studying me with a look that felt far more intimate than the words themselves. "Unexpected," she said finally. "But not unwelcome." The quiet between us felt heavy again, though not uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that holds a story either person is brave enough to tell yet. As I reached for the door, her fingers touched my wrist, light, lingering just long enough to turn the moment into something deliberate. "Take care of yourself," she said, her voice softer now. "I will," I answered. "And thank you for everything." Her smile deepened just a little, the kind that starts in the eyes before it reaches the lips. "Don't thank me," she said. "Just remember this morning when life feels too fast." I stepped outside into the cool air, the door closing gently behind me. The house was quiet again, but not the same quiet it had been when I first arrived. There was something warm in it now, something that felt like it had been left for me to carry. As I walked down the driveway, I heard her laughter faintly through the window, soft, low, and just enough to make me look back.